Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming out today. My name is Ginger Olszewski, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center Evening with Kim Poovey, author of the newly released historical novel Shadows of the Moss. In her endorsement of the book, Kim's fellow Lowcountry novelist Susan Diamond Riley said, "This captivating saga instantly draws readers into Irish immigrant Maggie McFarland's quest to find her own self-worth in a new land where men claim others as property." As Maggie's journey takes her from mid-19th century Ireland to Pennsylvania and south to the Carolina Lowcountry, she learns that her own trials and gifts offer her a unique perspective on the value of freedom and just what constitutes a real family. Thought-provoking and inspiring. Kim Poovey is an author, storyteller, and living the story. Her previous books are Truer Words, Through Button Eyes, Memoirs of an Edwardian Teddy Bear, Dickens' Mice, The Tales Behind the Tale, and The Haunting of Monroe Manse. Kim lives in a haunted 1890s Victorian cottage here in Beaufort with her husband Daryl and their furry children. Tonight, Kim will be in conversation with Jonathan Haupt, our Conroy Center's executive director, the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, and co-editor of the anthology Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy, winner of 17 book awards. Please join me in welcoming Kim and Jonathan.
Thank you, Ginger, and thank you all for being with us tonight. We are live streaming to Facebook tonight, which is what you see going on over in this corner. And since the camera is on us and not you, I just want to say for the at-home audience, there are easily 300 people. Easily. It stretches back to Nemesis. That's how far the room goes. And that's important because you didn't believe anybody was going to show up.
I was worried.
Yes.
I was worried that there'd be like 3 people. So I invited as many as I could just in case.
It works. How many of you are dedicated Kim Poovey enthusiasts? How many of you read one or more of Kim's books already? That's a lot of you, yeah. Anybody read tonight's topic, Shadows of the Moss? Oh, just, all right, so that means no spoilers. That's probably a note for me more so than you, but we will act accordingly. I'm so glad you were able to do this. This is really important.
I appreciate it.
I will say as well that Kim was one of the guest instructors in our Camp Conroy, our summer camp for young readers and writers just a couple of weeks ago. So awesome. You came in to talk about your journey as a writer, which we'll cover a little bit tonight, and it turned into this sort of competitive ghost story.
It did. Yeah, you say ghost story to kids, and one's like, oh, there was this ghost in my grandmother's house, and then there's like, wait a minute, and then there was, and before you know it, and I kept looking at Jonathan, I was like, do things like go to lunch or something? And finally, after like 30 minutes, I was like, save me, and he's just like, nah, you got time. I think I went around the table twice to hear ghost stories, so yeah.
But there were a couple of points where I wasn't actually sure if they were narrating ghost stories or reporting a crime.
Yeah, there was one that I was just like, the girl was like, oh yeah, I was running by myself in the woods and I saw this man, and I'm like, okay, that's when you get your cell phone down and you scream and you run. She's like, no, it was a ghost. I was like, no, honey, don't take this chance.
Not a ghost story.
Yeah, not a ghost story.
Just kidnapping. That's
Yeah, I know. Everyone was like, no, that's not good. So.
But, and I mentioned the ghost stories because I have a writer friend who we posted here in Beaufort at Nevermore Books, named Kimberly Brock, and she said at one of our writers' conferences that all stories are ghost stories. And she just said it as a matter of fact. Like, why would anyone ever think otherwise? All stories are ghost stories. We all know that, right? But that's kind of true for you. There is sort of a haunting. It's true of this novel. There are very specific ghost stories in here, but that's kind of a theme that permeates all of your writing.
It does. There's a ghost in every book.
I hadn't planned on starting with this question, but here we are now.
There we are.
Yes. What is your relationship with ghosts as writers, as human being?
Well, like all other kids, you love ghost stories when you're a little kid. For those of us who are women and had slumber parties, what are you telling? You're telling ghost stories. The same ghost story at every slumber party. I was very blessed. My dad was very into drama and acting, and for my 5th grade slumber party, which I'm a June 1st baby, so I didn't want a cake because I don't like cake. So they gave me, I'm looking at my mom right now, I wanted a watermelon. So they got a watermelon and they drilled holes in it for my thing. But Dad told us the Telltale Heart. I remember the Edgar Allan Poe book was on our shelf, and he read that, so he told us that. We thought that was the greatest ghost story that we'd ever heard. And it didn't realize at the time we were getting a literature lesson at the same, classic literature. And that one went through all the slumber parties for a couple of years too, which is fun. But our house in Delaware was very haunted land, and so I guess I've just always been around ghosts, and of course Buford, hello. Buford's haunted because it's so fabulous you don't want to leave it in the afterlife, so you just stay and you haunt. And then I was a ghost tour guide for Kappa Ghost Tours for 17 years, so the ghosts are just kind of natural for me. We have ghost cats in our house. So.
I was going to ask, who or what is haunting your house?
We have a Civil War nurse, because the house where this is set, wait, wrong house. That's that story. Sorry. I'm getting my children mixed up. So the house that is across the street from us, which is the setting from Unromance, is very haunted. It was the hospital for the black soldiers during the Civil War. And so we were thinking, because my sister has actually seen the ghost, and she's described an 1860s nurse. And so we're thinking she was connected to that house, because our house wasn't there at the time. And all of the grounds were used as hospital grounds. So I'm thinking that she's the one haunting our house, because we dress up that way, and I think she got confused and was like, you're with me. What are you doing here? But we also, our house, for those who've been here long enough, there was a woman who had 60 cats, and she died. And I see one of my neighbors back there going, oh yeah. Yeah, she did too. And so everyone knew it as the cat house. So we actually have ghost cats. We've actually seen them. You know how cats rub against your leg? We'll rub against her leg. We'll look down thinking it's our cat, and our cat's like asleep in the other room. And we're like, I'll hear him yelling from the back going, Kim, ghost cat! So ghosts are just kind of part of me.
I appreciate your optimism that that's a cat.
I'm in trouble. There's something coming up from the grave and pulling me down. That's another book.
Well, I want to dive into Shadows of the Moss, and the way I thought I would do this to sort of give you an initial framing question is quote a beautiful blessing that appears in the book, and I think it's an Irish blessing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is it. I wrote it down because I wanted to get it right and probably steal it and use it several times in context. May you have warm words on a cold evening, a full moon on a dark night, and a smooth road to all of your dreams. That's beautiful. Isn't that great? Everybody write that down and use that as toasts from now on, right? But we got a bunch of writers in the room, and as all writers know, the path to a book is always smooth, right? Nothing ever goes wrong. It's always the easiest thing ever. No, that's not the case at all. But what was the path to this particular book? I take it was not smooth.
This one was smoother than the other one. The other one's my problem. I refer to them as my children. I think it was Teresa Bruce. It was an interview with her years ago, and she had made a comment that writing a book is like giving birth to a child. And that it's your child, and when you send it out into the world, you're like, oh my gosh, what do people like it? What if they say mean things? And and you're just like protective of it. And so this is my baby. She's a good girl. She did not fight me like The Haunting of Unromance did. But this started out, I was a docent at Rose Hill Plantation down in Bluffton. And of course, Plantation House has ghosts. And they're one of the ghost stories. They didn't know the identity of the ghost. And without I won't say too much about it because it's kind of a core part of the book. So I always wondered, I was like, okay, it was going to be the third book in my series, the Haunting series. And I was going to explain the backstory of this ghost. And then someone had come and visited the house, and so they remembered seeing a map about Rose Hill once upon a time, and that they had heard it was a safe house for the Union Army soldiers. And when I heard safe house, my mind automatically went to Underground Railroad. And all of a sudden the two clashed, and that's why it ended up being its own. It's kind of what I consider my first dark novel, because it's tough.
It is.
There's a lot of reality in it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, but it's beautifully written too.
Yes, thank you.
Such a powerful book.
Thank you.
And it is close to 500 pages. It is not a small book, but I read this in about 3.5 hours. I sat down with it.
I want to read like you.
I want to know where this is going.
Oh, okay. So now all of us feel really ashamed that we can't pump out a book in 3.5 hours. Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Well, I guess you have to because.
Well, it is. I have some experience with this. What kept me so focused, so committed, is Maggie. Maggie is such an amazing protagonist to this story. She's all of 17 when she arrived. She's an immigrant. She's been sent over because of the famine, and is wonderfully optimistic about the world she's going to find in the United States, and that's not her path at all. So would you tell everybody a little bit about Maggie and maybe where the character came from?
Maggie, Maggie originally was the woman in the ghost story, the ghost, if you will. But then, like I said, when it shifted to the Underground Railroad, I don't think people realize how complex our history is and how really dark it is. I mean, yes, there's a lot of good points too, but there's a lot of darkness. And there's still a lot of darkness in the way we accept people of different cultures and different religions and different beliefs. And the Irish were loathed and despised at that time. I mean, really horribly treated. And now we celebrate them. We have, St. Patrick's Day, and everybody's wearing green, everyone celebrates them, and I'm like, and everyone looks back now and goes, oh my gosh, really? We hated them? They actually had signs in the, Irish do not apply. You were just considered filth. And so I wanted people to understand, I still hear those things being said about certain populations today, and I'm sitting there thinking, when are we going to learn? People are people, we're human beings, for goodness sakes. We're just human beings. We might not agree with each other, we might have different views. But that's what I wanted people to understand about Maggie is that, America was the land of opportunity, and she got here, and it was like, whoa. All of a sudden abuse began, and it wasn't the fairy tale that she had led herself to believe.
I've talked to a lot of novelists who write historical fiction, and they all say different versions of the same thing. That a good historical novel, which this most assuredly is, tells us about the past and the present simultaneously. And the immigrant experience that Maggie has echoes, as you alluded to, conversations that are happening in pockets and communities of the country now.
Today.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it all seemed wonderfully relevant.
Scary.
Wonderfully is the wrong word. It all
I
seems
understood.
relevant.
Yeah,
Yes.
sadly. Yeah.
There we are. So there are these three families, and the cast is huge. The cast is so big in this book.
That's why the book's so big.
Wow. But we have kind of these three main families who have parallels and conflicts, and they play off of each other, and their stories are interwoven in really interesting ways. The Stevensons, the Milners, and the Polks, I believe, are the third. Could you talk a little bit about who those families are and how they relate to Maggie's story?
Okay, so the Stevensons, which are not nice people, that's the first family, are based on all of the mean people in my life. People who have done horrible things to me, I made them the characters. And it was really freeing. So they're kind of not a real family. I just took all the mean things people have done and I made them into these people. But one of the characters, I wanted people to understand that people aren't born evil. They're made that way. And sometimes they're made that way by their circumstances, and sometimes that's beyond their control. And you'll kind of, I don't want to give any spoilers away while you'll understand that later. The second family, the Milners, are based on some very dear friends of ours, Jack Miller and his wife Becky and their daughter Marissa were part of our church. And they had such a huge impact on my life. These are just the most generous and giving and loving people. And they were from that area of Pennsylvania, and he was the one that turned me on to Thaddeus Stevens. And so there's a scene in there, he's a pastor in the book as well, and there's a scene in there where he's giving his benediction as part of his sermon. And that was actually what Jack had ended one of our sermons at our church, so I pulled that from it. So that was my dedication to them, because he kind of helped me kind of maneuver this Underground Railroad stuff. and turn me on to more sources. So, and then the third family is based on the Kirk family, who owns and built Rose Hill Plantation. Now, I took artistic liberties with their views on slavery, and the young lady that is in that family is a member of our church who I love and adore. Her name is Alora, and she is just one of those spectacular lights in this world. So I kind of based that character on her. So that's for all the families. But the history about Rose Hill is accurate, except for the fact that they weren't a stop on the Underground Railroad. But like I said, I took artistic liberties. Made it that.
Yes. So Rose Hill becomes Rose Hall. It's
Yeah.
one letter difference.
Real creative, huh?
Yeah.
I was kind of like Magnolia Hall, Magnolia Plantation, like, oh, that's so cliche. So I'm like, Rose Hall, there we go.
No, I'm glad you honored your connection with that house. You and I both have connections with that house in interesting ways. You much more than me, but yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
is a
love that
beautiful
house.
story. Generations of
Oh my
beautiful
gosh,
stories
that
all
house
over
is,
that
you can't, it's just so full of history.
Yes.
And it has a good soul to it.
It
For
does.
those of us who love old houses, you know, they have feel. I'm looking at some of my neighbors who have old houses, and it's like there's a feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, she has a wonderful feel.
Absolutely, she does. Yeah. The other thing that makes the book quick reading, at least for me, at least the way that I read, is that it's so dialogue driven. All of these characters come to life in what they say, and the voices are distinctive. Even if you weren't being told who was speaking, I can always tell, because you've got such a well-defined sense of how they speak and how that reflects their personalities.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, and that's not easy to do. That's why it's important to discuss, because that's not something that comes naturally for a lot of writers. I'm wondering, in your writing process, are you hearing these voices in your head, or to get the right words for the right characters down?
When I'm what they call a pantser for the writers in here. You have plotters who outline everything. It just does not work for me. And then you have pantsers like me who are really, really crazy because we can't outline, and so it's just kind of coming as it comes. And so it's like a movie running in my head. I can see the whole thing, and I'm just trying to write it down, or type it in as fast as I can't write it because my mind goes faster than my hand. And I hunt and peck on a computer, so it's really odd that I can do that. But nonetheless, so yeah, I can see them holding the conversation. I did do Joan Dempsey, who was, I don't know if you've heard of Joan Dempsey. She's one of these prolific writers who does a lot of classes online, and she did a dialogue workshop and kind of helped me with the technique.
Okay.
That did a lot for me. So any writers out there looking for a good dialogue coach, her classes are affordable and they're all online. Commercial paid for by me. Because I had to pay for the classes. Yeah, so I don't know, it's just a movie in my head and I just type it out.
Did she give advice, or did someone give advice about using dialect, going deeply into dialect versus not? Because you strike a really nice balance that honors where people are from.
Wow.
We have Maggie, who has some very specific, Irish phrasing that she uses, particularly in relationship to her father, and gets called out on that a couple of times.
Or da.
Yes.
Da, yeah.
Then we also have some enslaved characters and some other African American characters with varying degrees of education, and always with very distinctive voices reflective of their backgrounds.
I think that's important because we're not all the same.
Yeah.
Just because you're African American doesn't mean you speak the same. Just because you're European American doesn't mean you speak the same. And I think that in order for your characters to be alive, because they kind of are in my head, I'm going to be in a nursing home someday. Talking about this stuff like it's really happened. They're going to be like, but yeah. So the gullah is easier for me to write because I'm around it. But that was I can't believe you picked up on that. I wanted people to understand that not all African Americans at that time were the same. A lot were free, a lot were educated, not as many as should have been. And then you had slaves, and the slaves came from different regions, and the different regions had different dialects. And we're blessed that we have the Gullah people here, and with that rich history and that beautiful language that I can't even understand. But I love this. It's like sing-songy when I hear it. I was just trying to show people that we're the same and not the same at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was profound.
It does come through. It really shines through the dialogue.
Wow.
You do that so well.
I'll have to let Jen Dempsey know that you said that.
Do we all know the writer Lee Smith in the room? If few heads nodding yes. North Carolina writer, certainly not exclusive to North Carolina, much bigger than that. But Lee has described this state that a writer gets to where the characters come so alive in your head, you spend so much time getting to know them, that you just kind of become their transcriptionists. They tell you what they're going to do and what they have to say.
That's exactly
and
what
that's
I
sort
felt.
of how I imagined you.
Oh, wow. Well, that's kind of the way it felt. That was really good.
But even though you don't self-identify as a plotter, you have this very elaborate plot, and it all comes down to secrets and stories. Who knows what about whom at any given moment? And you've got to keep it all straight in your head. Okay, these people have this secret, but it relates to this family. They don't know it yet, but they're going to know it when we get to this chapter.
Hush. I'm looking at my husband. He's behind the camera. I'm going, hush.
And what I'm envisioning, which I now know is in no way your experience, is those of you who are familiar with, like, this is such a trope in TV series and movies, particularly about, like, serial killers, where the detective has the wall that has the photos and different things, and then there's the string, right? And that's sort of what I'm imagining. It didn't physically exist, it was in your imagination, right? To keep all of these plot lines and all of these characters sort of in their relationships, because you got to reveal them at specific moments. And there's a payoff every time. Is that what it is? Does it come out of Post-it notes?
Post-it notes in different colors. Yeah, it sits there on my writing desk, and it's like, I'll be writing, it's like, uh-oh, one of the characters starts telling me something that's going to happen in a few chapters, and it's like, oh, God, I'm writing it. And then I'll do something else, and it's like, oh, I got to remember that too. And then for the writers in here at the middle of the night, don't you love that? 3 a.m., God's saying, wake up, got a story for you. So you're fumbling around and you're trying to write, and then you can't read. There's a Seinfeld episode where you can't read what he wrote the next day. Yeah, because you're writing sideways. You know, or you don't want to wake your partner up, so you picked it up and you go to the hallway where the little nightlight is, and you're underneath. Open up my glasses. I have no idea what I'm writing. Yeah. No, I just keep little Post-it notes, and then I go back and reread them, and then usually the characters change his mind by then.
It doesn't matter anymore. Yes.
I'm not ready.
Whatever you're doing, it works, because it's such an elaborate plot, but it feels organic. When reveals happen, like, oh, yes, of course that's true, but it's still powerful.
Okay.
And there are some big reveals near the end that we will not get into for the sake of staying clear of those spoilers. But it felt earned, it felt organic and important when it happened every single time, which is difficult to achieve, particularly in a large-scale novel like this. And doing it so well.
Thank you.
Yes, Post-it notes, apparently.
Post-it notes, yes.
And I mentioned secrets and stories, and I don't want to jump topics before I talk about stories too, because Maggie is a wonderful storyteller. Stories are part of her existence, they're part of who she
The
is.
Irish.
And so there are stories within the stories, and one of them was so fascinating to me, the story of Figgy Pudding, which would just sort of drop into this. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so I've been a storyteller much longer than I've been a writer, and so I tell stories to kids. So ghost stories and legends and all this stuff, and so I've been writing stories, not like writing, but creating stories for, 26 years now. And so the Figgy fairies, fairies are a major part of the Irish culture, and so, I don't know, what was it? There was something, I just read something about figs or something, and I was like, okay, Figgy fairies. And so that's one of the stories that she tells. And I think there's another fairy story in there too, but I don't know, I got kind of hooked on fairies when I was doing all this.
There's the Spanish moss story with the ogres and the fairies.
Oh, yes,
too.
yes.
It happens twice. It's
Yeah.
beautiful each time.
Thank you. Yeah, I did do a story. My other mother, Millie, who lives here in town, Millie Boyce. Yeah, who a lot of you know Millie. Yes, she and I had a storytelling business for a lot of years, and we had this little girls' party that we're gonna, and I had to come up with a story for it. And I've been trying all week long. Nothing's coming. Nothing. And it's that Saturday morning, and Millie's calling. She's like, "Do you have a story yet?" And I was just like, "Nothing. I have nothing." So I had to go to the post office that morning. As I'm coming over the McTier Bridge, all of a sudden it comes, and I'm like, "Really?" Oh my! So here I am. I'm driving and I'm writing. I'm watching. I'm writing. And so I'm standing in the post office line. I'm writing. And it was the legend of the Spanish moss. So I have a legend of how that moss came to be, and it's princesses and fairy tale nonsense, because that's what little girls want to hear at their parties. So now I have 2 Spanish small stories. One with fairies, one with a princess,
Whichever one.
whichever one you want. Yeah. So there we go.
Swiss Army knife of stories.
There you go. There you go. It's very, very amenable to whatever your situation. So yeah.
But those moments really shine in the book because it's Maggie's way of sharing who she is as a storyteller and as an educator. She's a teacher in her way in those moments and in several other moments too. And I think about how difficult that is for her because she's been so beat down, figuratively and literally, not to give too much away.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that aspect of the character in the book too, because so much of Maggie's arc, where she is at different points, is what we would, in our modern terminology, refer to as trauma response. And you are, among many other things, a school psychologist as well. So I'm wondering if that skill set, if that knowledge base informs the way that you shape this particular character, or any of your writing for that matter.
Maybe it does on a subconscious level, not on a conscious level. A little bit more with Sarah, the character, and I keep pointing.
Yes.
Sorry. At the Nun Romance, there's a little more. I use a little more psychology in her character because she's modern day. But Maggie, it just seemed natural with Maggie. This is just the way she was. She was so optimistic, and then she was thrown into the dirt, and she had to kind of build back up. But she builds herself back up by helping others, and I think that gives her strength and her fuel to keep going.
There's a line that I think it's Mrs. Miller, and if it is, it makes total sense that that's Becky, who's the basis for that. Mrs. Milner, the character, says this. And then it's echoed later on, and I don't think we're giving too much away by sharing this, but the advice is don't diminish what you've suffered. It's not a contest. And that really informs the way that Maggie, who remember is involved in the Underground Railroad at this point, is seeing other people's suffering in contrast to her own. It really informs her character development from the moment those words are spoken to her later, so much so that it's echoing, literally echoing in her head, but also echoing in the actions and the choices that she made.
You see that a lot in society. Everyone's like, well, you didn't go through this, or everyone's like comparing to see whose suffering is worse. If you suffer, you suffer, and some people suffer from what other people consider a minor problem, and different people react differently. So don't judge them. Just accept the fact that you suffered. Let's work through it. You don't have to be suffering more than somebody or less than somebody to feel your pain. Pain is individual. It just depends on who you are and what you've lived through.
Yeah. And that depth of character development really shines through in another character we haven't talked about yet. We absolutely have to. We've mentioned ghosts in the spiritual sense, but there's also a living character whose nickname is Ghost, who rides around on a horse named Phantom. And this is our romantic male lead, Seth Daniels, who emerges from the woods superhero-like in exactly the right moment.
Yes.
And when it happened, I was like, oh, this is not going to go anywhere. This is just a stock character who stepped over from another novel, but you spend so much time developing his depth and his tragic backstory and who he is and all these complicated aspects of who he is that, even though I didn't want to like him, because who needs that guy?
I'm in love with Seth.
A couple chapters after he's there, and certainly by the end, he's amazing. I'm on Team Seth.
I'm going to say, there you go. Yeah, he's amazing. He is. But he's suffered, and instead of becoming a cruel, horrible person, like what he's experienced in his life, he turned it around. But he was rescued by the Polks. I'm not giving away too much. But he was rescued by them, and instead of going into the darkness, he went towards the light. And actually, book 2 and if I'm jumping ahead.
No, go.
The sequel's already written. It's just got to be edited yet. But the sequel is actually going to take a little diversion in that it's not just Maggie's perspective. It will be Maggie's, Seth's, and Alora's. So you will get 3 different perspectives in the next. You'll see from their different purviews. So, my writing coach encouraged Charlotte Rains Dixon, who I love and adore, and she is the reason that this has come out as smoothly as it has. She was like, we talked about it, and she's like, do it, you can do this. And I was just like, this is insane. So hopefully it will come across correctly. But you will learn a little bit more from Seth's perspective in the next book.
Oh, I look forward to that. Yeah, absolutely. I've got about 3 3 more questions, gang, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. So think of this as your 5 to 6 minute warning. I want to mention just a couple of other things I haven't talked about yet that are really big, beautiful moments for the book.
Okay.
And one we're going to have to talk about in code because I don't want to take the secret away from anybody.
Okay.
But there's a really big cameo appearance that happens late in the book by a historical figure very much associated with Beaufort and with St. Helena and what's kind of stuff there. But
she's a major player in book 2.
Okay.
She's major. She's in the whole book 2.
So there's a payoff for what are relatively small but important appearances in this book.
Yeah, it's kind of a lead-in.
Did you know early on you were going to incorporate that character into this story, or did it just sort of happen?
Because she was such an incredible person, and no offense to any other place in the world, but let's face it, Beaufort is fabulous. I think it was Dr. Rowland that said, American history started in Beaufort. And our history is so rich, and we have so many amazing characters, I say characters, they're real people, that back in that time period should not have been doing what they were doing, and they were doing it. So yeah, she's always been a favorite icon in this area to me. So yeah, she had to be in the book.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad there's more to come with it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
I love her.
Yes. So there's another Low Country character that's super important to the book as well, and that is the Low Country itself as character. That sort of defining aspect of almost all of Southern literature. You never have to wonder where Southern literature is set, because somebody's going to tell you, and it's going to be essential to the story. It's going to be set in the only place that it could be set, and setting always becomes a character. And that's true of the way you treat the Low Country in this book as well. I want to quote just one small line and then ask you about it, and it's this. Despite the vast differences from the Irish landscape, Maggie was falling in love with the Low Country. Its mystique and general splendor soothed her soul. And those of you who are from here, and those of you lucky enough to now be from here, as I am, that resonates with all of us, right? We know what that means immediately, but people out there in Facebook land who have not visited our Low Country yet may not get what that is. Can you speak to that? Can you speak to what the Low Country means to you personally, and then we'll get into what it means to these characters.
Salvation.
Yeah.
Salvation. It is the most beautiful. I'm looking at Jerry, who was blessed to be born and raised here. I'm sure there's others in here too that have experienced that, but it's like the salt air can heal all wounds. And just the scent of pluff mud, you can bottle that for me. I love it when the tide goes out and you guys know when you inhale and you can smell that salt water and that pluff mud, and it's like, and the breezes are just, there's something in this place, it's like you can feel all the people that have ever been here before, and they're welcoming. This town welcomes everyone, even crazy eccentric people like me. And they accept, and it's so artsy. You've got your artsy community, you've got your historical community, you've got your regular people community, you've got all the people that moved to your community, but everybody intertwines, and it's accepting of one another, and I just think that's beautiful, and that's the beauty of this place, is that in all of its history for hundreds of years, it's always banded together. It's got dark points, no question about that, but it's a strong place, and you can't appreciate it unless you actually come. You either love it or you don't. There's like no in between. So I don't know. I think it's the best place in the world. No offense to anybody out in Facebook land who wants to disagree. You're just wrong. So
There's a creative energy to this place too. I hear it from writers, from artists of every kind, that there's something about being in a place where you can see and smell and hear the world being created and destroyed twice a day, every day, as the tide comes in and out. And it just gets into you. Pat wrote about this, he talked about it all the time, but it wasn't exclusive to Pat. You must feel that too.
oh my gosh, I mean, Beaufort calls the homeless. And when I say homeless, I'm not talking about like you don't have a house to live in. I'm talking about the people who don't fit in anywhere else. They're the people who were blessed to be born here, and then there's those of us that she calls. And you get here, it's like, you just don't fit in anywhere else. People, they look at you like you're crazy, or you don't belong, or whatever. They think you're nuts, and they're like, why would you do something so stupid? You come to Beaufort, it's like, oh, it's okay, come on. It's just, to me, it calls them. I was homeless in my heart until I came in. I was from Florida. I'm a beach bum. Always, my whole life, my mom already said, I'm going back to Florida when I grow up. Oh, no, Marine Corps brought us here, and this was it.
Seth would agree with you.
I think they would.
It is healing to them in a way that both of those characters need too. And this takes us back around to Pat Conroy and our Conroy Center, and why I knew I wanted to talk to you in this room of the Conroy Center. We're surrounded by pictures of the real Pat teaching on the real Defusky Island. Water is Wide came out 50 years ago this year. And at Pat's 70th birthday party, that Pat Conroy 70 festival that we had, he ended up on stage in a moment when he really wasn't supposed to be up there, kind of happenstance, serendipity. And he was asked a question he wouldn't have been asked otherwise, and it was, which of your books is closest to your heart? And off the cuff, unexpected, some of you were there, will remember this. He said, it's The Water is Wide, because that was, quote, the magic year I became the man I was meant to be. Isn't that beautiful? He's not describing a year of writing, that came after. He's describing a year of teaching, and that's what his photos document. So that was 70-year-old, internationally acclaimed, best-selling author Pat Conroy, still thinking of himself first and foremost as a teacher because of his experiences on Defusky Island. And I think in the course of this novel, Maggie and Seth both become the people that they're meant to be as well, by virtue of their experiences in the Lowcountry.
They did it molded who they are.
And very much like Pat, they're responding to the trauma of their background, choosing not to become those people, not to become people who hurt others the way that they were hurt, but to become people who help others. And it just fits so perfectly into our conversation. It's just ideal.
I'm just kind of a huge Pat Conroy fan, just a little bit. My husband's over here now looking at me like, oh yeah, it's just kind of addictive, but yeah.
So those of you in the front row may actually be able to see we are wearing almost coordinating colors.
You can't come to the Conroy Center without wearing your chucks.
But you have a Dickens Ghost pair that is not.
I do. Dickens Ghost is my imprint. So I do have, because Jonathan, got me hooked on the, and Brent McLean too, on the custom ones.
We're enablers.
Yes. I've got 5 pairs in the closet now. Number 6 will be coming soon.
So let's talk a little bit about Charles Dickens and how he relates to your writing life. And we could do this for hours. We don't have hours.
We don't.
Yes, but
Greatest writer ever, in my opinion. I love Charles Dickens. Everything. As a child, I loved Charles Dickens. For modern day writers, my favorite is Pat Conroy, of course. But for historical literature, Dickens, hands down. So yeah. The name of my imprint. I was traditionally published for my first 2 novels, and then my publisher shut down. So I was thrown into this indie world. And it took a few years to figure out the indie world. It was really scary. But so Dickens Ghost, because Dickens, I'd like to think, haunts me in my mind. His writing, I mean, it's like you read his books, and it's like listening to him talking to you. And I mean, talk about twists and turns and soap operas. Oh my gosh!
Yes.
I mean, it's all over the place. So yeah, that's my tribute to Dickens. I love him.
Yes. The other thing Dickens did, which he's often credited for creating, he didn't create the cliffhanger, but he certainly perfected it. And he commercialized it. He made a sales tool, which was super smart and for a writer. You've got a beautiful cliffhanger in this book. So, and I'm delighted to learn that you're already have book 2 done. You know where that cliffhanger is going. You know what's supposed to happen
end on a
next.
cliffhanger. Book 3 of this book is going to intersect with book 4 of The Haunting of London Manse.
Crossover events.
Yeah, she says that now.
Universe building, that's what we call that.
Bill's Liquor is going to make a lot of money off of that one. Yeah, and my poor writing coach, we might have to pay her extra. But yeah, we're gonna attempt it.
That's fantastic. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. This is over going, oh, great. This is not going to be fun. Yeah. Poor Joe.
No, he's a good advocate.
Yeah, God help him. He's wearing he's got a name tag. For those who can't see it, it says Daryl Poovey, broke husband of a writer. So God help him. He hauls books, and he listens to my fits, and catches the computer when I throw it. And when I'm sobbing on the front porch, go, I'll never do it. Brings me another glass of wine. It just lets me drink it out. Yeah.
When I started out working in publishing at SIU Press, Carbondale, Southern Illinois University, I was working with a really wonderful mentor, Dan Siders, who had been a novelist and had put that on hold to do his publishing career, and he and his wife Judy had been married for 50 years. So when he came to my wedding, I asked him beforehand, Dan, you got to tell me what's the secret to a 50-year marriage? This is about to be day one for me. How you got 50 years in? And he said, Jonathan, in my experience, it takes one person to write novels and the other to do absolutely everything else.
That's brilliant. And so true. So true. Oh my gosh.
So that's the secret for you.
That's the secret.
You too as well. Yes.
That we didn't have human children. I think that children probably ruin marriages more probably. Yeah, sorry. I had to throw that one out there sometimes.
I lied about having 3 more questions. I think there was like 5. But at this point, I really do want to open it up to you all and any questions that you may have for Kim about this book, about any of her books, about her writing life, about her ghost cats. Let's hope that's what they are. Whatever's on your mind, gang. Who's got a question?
How soon is the sequel going to be out?
The sequel to Shadows of the Moss will prayerfully be out by spring of next year. I say prayerfully because the one thing that stops me every time is uploading. I'm technologically impaired. And uploading to Ingram Sparks can sometimes be a bit tricky. If you don't hold your mouth just right and actually sneeze, it comes back with errors and says, nope, can't do it. And then you spend another 3 weeks trying to figure out what the error was, just to find out that in fact all you had to do was press go and it would have overwrote it. So the plan is somewhere between March and May. Depends on how quickly my editor, who is also my writing coach, and I get through it, because I'm biting off a big chunk here with 3 different perspectives. So that's the plan. Book 2 of The Haunting of Romance prayerfully will be out in November. So it'll be something in yeah.
I said soon happily, and then
yeah, I'm just like, oh, it's just like, it sounds like so far away, but it's like it's going to be here like that.
Yeah.
What's the title of the sequel to Haunting?
That will be The Haunting of Edgefield Manor. It will be set in Edgefield, South Carolina, and if you've never been to Edgefield, I couldn't make it up if I tried. I have never seen a quirkier, crazier. Seriously, I could not make this stuff up if I tried. So a lot of the stuff in the sequel to Haunting Among Romance is real. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You know, Murder and Mayhem is the name of one of their tours, if that gives you any ideas. Okay,
Somewhere in the back
Catherine.
was a question.
Yes. Aside from your writing coach, what is your process, Kim? I mean, other than crying on the front porch and that's when you take breaks. But seriously, I mean, you have not retired, correct?
No, I'm
And
still
so,
working.
how do you do it?
Just tired.
Well, I'll tell you two things that really help are Monday and Thursday nights. My writing coach has a 2-hour stint. It's virtual, and anyone can join who's a writer. We link up at she's in Oregon, so it's 6 o'clock our time. We all check in with each other, say hey, and then we write for an hour. And then at the 1 hour mark, she comes back in, checks in, how's everyone doing? Oh, we're doing great, or we're kind of stuck, whatever. Okay, write for another hour, and you'd be surprised. You feed off that energy, even though it's virtual, and it keeps you in the seat. Butt in chair is the writer's clause. Butt in chair. Keep your butt in chair and keep writing. I have a writing room now. And I just sit at my desk and let the characters talk to me, and then I just write. So some days I have to squeeze out 30 minutes. It's like they're just kind of tired and not talking, and other days I can't shut them up. And there was one time last summer, I think I went like 5 hours, and by the time I was done, I was like, y'all are killing me. So yeah, I just sit down and type. That's just what I do. And then sometimes I look at Facebook for a few minutes, just give my brain a break, and 30 minutes later, it's like, well, you gotta write. It's all writing time, right? Because it's on the computer. Yes, ma'am.
So have you ever thought about dictating it to the computer?
I do that sometimes when I'm driving,
Yeah.
and they start talking to me, and I'm driving, and I can't text and drive, so I just pop the little, and it's just like, and I start talking into it. When he's not asleep, and like early in the morning when it's coming, and if he's out of bed already, I'll hit the dictate button. Yeah, to dictate the whole thing, I would have to talk too fast, and then it would I still get some real jumbled words in there, and it's like, what the heck is this? Like a name, like Elora comes out as something, really weird, but, so yeah. Questions?
Other questions here?
Yeah, how much of the book took place in Ireland, and what type of research did you do?
Okay, none of it takes place in Ireland.
Oh, okay.
There's one scene that she's flashing back on where she's saying goodbye to her father on the Irish dock. But no, none of it takes place in Ireland. Ireland just kind of it's her starting point. As for the research, I don't research as heavily as a lot of others, but the ship that she sails over on actually sailed to the port in Pennsylvania. Actually, her character there was a Margaret McFarland that was on that ship, so I just shortened it to Maggie. And so, so the historical aspects of the Underground Railroad, I read 2 diaries. One was Levi Coffin and one was William Stills. Each were major conductors on the railroad. One was black, one was white. Because I wanted those perspectives. So I'm sorry to say that the scenes in here about these escapees and what they went through as slaves and on the route to freedom are pretty accurate. Now, I did take artistic liberties. I couldn't do each one because there's thousands of different ones. So I combined some of the things together. Some of the different reports I combined together and made them into one. But
Some
yeah.
They're all harrowing, but some are tremendously tragic, and I won't give away too much.
Yeah, there is one that I had to. It's really truly horrific, and I want people to understand these people suffered so horribly, and what they were willing to go through. I mean, some of them would rather die on that road to freedom than go back to slavery. It's just, if people could understand how really truly horrible that was, to have your children sold away, to have, for people who escaped and were caught, to be tortured to death in front of the other slaves because they needed to send a message. It was really disgusting. And yes, there were some slave owners who weren't cruel. I mean, it's all cruel. But you just can't, I don't think any of us can wrap our minds around, which is why Robert Smalls was such an incredible human being. I mean, somebody who held him in slavery and he takes care of her the rest of her life. Yes. I mean, that talk about forgiveness and compassion, that man was unbelievable. So sorry, sidetracked. Sorry. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, were there many Underground Railroad houses or places in South Carolina?
I couldn't honestly tell you how many or where they were. I know that there were some. I think the majority of them were generally up in like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, because the goal was to get to Canada. Some escapees would kind of settle in some of the northern states, but even the northern states, see, that's the other thing. Everyone thinks that the North was all pro-freedom. No, they weren't. No, they were not. And they would return you in a skinny minute, turn you back over. And a lot of the northern states were cruel to their African Americans, and they still held, during the Civil War, there were a couple of northern states that still held slaves. So that's what I'm trying to show, is that it's not one area, it's not one society, it's not one type of person. This was global in our country. And we have to learn from it, we can't forget it. We've got to realize how horrible we've been in the past and not repeat those same mistakes, which I fear we're kind of edging towards. So did that answer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Diane.
Kim, on a lighter note, as friends on Facebook,
Yes.
you're always throwing out words, and you and I have had the conversation. Those words are going to appear in these novels. When they appear in these novels, are we going to have to pull out our dictionary again? Are we going to go back into Facebook and find it? Or are you going to work the meaning into the sentence so we know where we're at?
I found myself today reading Matt Goldman's book, and there was a word I didn't know, and I started to touch it like you do on your Kindle, and I was like, no, that's not working. Generally speaking, if I'm using a phrase or a term, and this is in all of my books, that is not familiar, because if I'm writing historical fiction, I like to use the phrases. I actually have an 1850s and an 1880s thesaurus, so that I can get accurate terminology. But if I'm going to use that terminology, if you read through the author's notes, I will usually describe it or define it, or somehow in the sentence, because my writer coach, Pluff Mud Potter, she's like, what is that? She lives in Oregon, she's like, what is that? And so she's like, Kim, you gotta describe it, because we're not all from Beaufort. So I'm either gonna define it in the author's notes, or I'll define it in context. In the back of this book, I gave a brief glossary of some of the terminology used on the Underground Railroad, and some of those terms that would mean the same thing, but they were different terms, so they would interchange. And Maggie gets confused about that at one point in the book and asks one of the main characters, you know, you keep saying this, but I hear this, which one is correct? She says they're both correct, but you've got to learn to recognize all of the different phraseology and what it means. So, did that answer?
Yes, it did.
And what she was referring to is, I use the thesaurus online, and every day they have a daily word. And if I like the word and don't know what it means, I post it. So, yeah.
No, you're a word nerd, as any writer should be.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking of DIY, the MFA DIY, Gabriella.
Oh.
That's her, what she calls herself. So
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Any other questions, audience? All right, Kim, thank you all so much. Kim's going to stick around and sign books. Absolutely. So you have the long commute over to the
I
book
have a
sales
long
table.
commute where my